OBS. Okay. Come on. Never mind. Go away. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to kick off today is this project that we have been calling AsteraX for a long time, because at one point we thought it would be funny to call it that, but now it's been like years and I'm still calling it AsteraX, so I guess sorry about that. But hey, I'm going to kick off a new project. I'm going to say new, and this one, again, you know, we're trying to approach things through different learning styles. So there's the book, where you're going through with text, and that works better for some people. And then there's videos. I'm making a video, and my goal is to get us to a point in the next hour or 50 minutes where we've got kind of a working clone of asteroids. And because of that's going to have to be fast, because, you know, just to get asteroids built in 50 minutes is pretty fast. But I'm going to try and talk about what it is that I'm doing. And if you have questions, I want you to please raise your hand. And then what we'll do is we will ask you to go through this video tutorial as your assignment for Monday. And then, again, we're going to add a couple of small things to it as we go. So here we go. I'm going to create a project. Okay, great. So here's my Unity, and I'm going to go and make sure that my layout is like, you know, the way I like it. And in fact, I think the GameDev MI231 is the one that's actually set to 1080p, which is even better. Cool. So first thing I need to do is I need to save my scene, because it's smart to save things. So I'm going to save it as scene underscore scene underscore 0 and hit save, and that's going to save it there. Now, what are some elements that I need in this game? So it's asteroids. We've all probably seen asteroids. I'm afraid to go to a video of asteroids because then YouTube's going to be like, you stole this video from somebody. But, you know, you've got the thing where there's asteroids, and they kind of float around, and they wrap around the screen, and then there's a little ship in the middle, and it turns around and it shoots things. We're going to do it a little bit differently by having the ship be controlled with the WASD or arrow keys to sort of move left and right, up and down, as opposed to the vectored thrust model that is in the original game. And we're going to have, when you click, the ship fires at your mouse location, which is pretty cool because it allows us to talk a little bit about vector math, which I promise you is cool, even though none of you believe me. It's okay. Hey, Mac, is vector math cool? Yeah, all right, good. I got one person who's paid to agree with me. Fantastic. All right, cool. So, but yeah, so let's just start with the world's simplest ship. It's going to be a couple of spheres. So we're going to create a 3D object that is a sphere. Wow, it's a sphere. Look at that. It's amazing. All right, there we go. And I want my game to work in the YX plane, right? It's a two-dimensional game, basically. So I can sort of hold Option and rotate things around into where it's kind of lined up. You can also click this here, right there, and that'll line it up with each axis, so you can look at it from a certain direction. And you click this to switch between perspective and orthographic. Or you can just click this 2D button here, and that locks it into 2D and orthographic, which works out really nicely because it gives you this like cute little grid and stuff. Though again, the horizon there looks weird when we're in orthographic mode. So what I like doing is clicking up here and turning off the skybox, which gives me a nice gray background, which I frankly like working on the gray background because I find it less distracting here. And you can do the same thing with the camera. We showed this before, but you click on the camera, and under this clear flags, you go to solid color, and it'll clear it to this nice blue color, which eventually we can replace with an awesome star background or whatever you want to do. But right now, that's fine. The other thing I'm going to do while I'm on the main camera is you'll notice that the main camera has a Y location of 1, which works out really well if you've got ground at 0 and you've got a character that's about 1 meter tall, like it really shows that, though most characters are like 2 meters tall. But we're going to set the Y to 0 so that it's just aligned with the center of the world, just like that. Though this view up here is orthographic at the top, the view at the bottom is not orthographic. There's so many wires down here. Okay, the view at the bottom is still perspective. So as part of what we'll do next, we'll actually fix the camera at the bottom, and we'll do some of the same things that you did for the Apple Picker camera. But let's start with this. So we've got our sphere. Let's make it more of a ship. So I'm going to hold, when you hold Option in 2D mode, it pans like this. If you go back to 3D mode and hold Option, you'll see that it rotates the world. And I'm rotating this just to see kind of what I'm doing with with my sphere here. So in the Z direction, I'm going to set its dimension to 0.2, which gives me a nice flat shape like that. And then I'm going to create another sphere, and I'm going to make this one a child of the first one. So I'm going to right-click on the sphere and 3D Object, create a sphere. And you'll see, actually, it is directly aligned with the other one and also squished because it is a child of the other one, which means I probably shouldn't have done it that way. So let's delete this one. And I'm just going to instead go and create a regular 3D object sphere. And this one, you'll see the location is different. We talked about that last time. I'm going to set its scale to let's say 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, which gives me, or let's do 0.4. That'll be a little bit easier. 0.4, 0.4, 0.4, which gives me a little sort of sphere like that. And then if I set its location to an X and Y of 0 and a Z of negative 0.2, that's too far. See how that's too far? Let's set it to negative 0.1, negative being towards the camera. Then I've got this nice flying saucer shape that down here you can see is, yeah, that's a pretty decent flying saucer shape. I'm okay with that. All right, cool. So now, now that this is correctly sized relative to the main saucer, I can then drag it under the main saucer, or like sort of drag it on top like this. Let me go ahead and zoom in on that so you can really see what's going on. Drag it on top like that and release. Now it's embedded underneath it as a child, and you can see its dimensions are now, this one's 1.2, and now this is 0.4.42, and 0.2 times 2 is 0.4, and so that's why the Z dimension there is 2, because it is multiplying the scale of the parent by the scale of the child. So all right, so we got this nice thing now. Let's go ahead and name this like ship, or even player ship, so that we're really clear about which one this is. And then this thing we can name cockpit if we like. I don't think I'd do anything with it, but we'll just go ahead and name it anyway. All right, so we got a player ship. Let's start adding some code to this guy. So we're going to add component, create a new script, and we're going to call that script player ship, because that way we're not going to confuse it with anything else. It's like the player ship script is on the player ship game object, so that works out pretty well for us. So let's go ahead and open this up, and let's open it up. Come on, you can do it. This is where I ran into trouble last week, right? All right, so but now Visual Studio is playing nice. I have personally upgraded to 2017.3 now because I don't know, maybe I'm still on. Yeah, 2017.3 because other things seem to be working well now. Oh, come on. No, I don't need to update this right now. So here we go. Here's my script. Y'all can see that? Sweet. All right. So what do we want to do? Well, I want to move left and right based on the keyboard. And we haven't talked about any kind of keyboard movement, have we? No? Great. So let's talk about some keyboard movement. One of the super nice things that Unity does for you is it has this input manager. And it's really nice, and then it's kind of a pain eventually, but initially it's really nice. Come on, window input. Oh, I'm sorry, edit project settings input. There are a lot of things in this edit project settings submenu that are really important that I always think should be in the window menu, but they're not. So let's go ahead and do input. Now, it looks really small over here. It's hard to tell what's going on, but it's actually, you open up axes and it has all these different axes that are named, like horizontal and vertical. And if you look at horizontal and vertical, you can see that the negative button for horizontal, which is the button to be pressed for movement in negative direction, the negative button is left, which is the left arrow key. And the positive button is right, which is the right arrow key. Also, an alternate negative button is A, which is the A key on the keyboard, and D is the positive one. So that means left arrow key and A are linked, and D and right arrow key are linked. And they're linked to this single axis named horizontal. And this works out really nicely because it means I can ask for the horizontal axis, and it doesn't matter whether your player likes using WASD or the arrow keys, it'll still work for them. And in fact, if you scroll down further, you can see, hey, there's another horizontal down here, and this one is the joystick axis. So I can make a game with just using this input manager that works with either like the arrow keys or WASD or the joystick. And usually that means like the left button, the left joystick on like a controller. That'll be the left joystick on a PS4 controller or an Xbox 360 or Xbox One controller, or really pretty much any kind of controller. In fact, I just found out yesterday that you can use the Vive controllers for like the HTC Vive VR headset, and that trackpad where you touch on the trackpad becomes the horizontal axis. So there's all this stuff you can get, and all you have to do in code is grab the horizontal axis, which ranges from -1 to 1. Now, how do I know that? I know that because I clicked this little guy right here, the info book here, the reference, and this opens up a local reference to the input manager and tells me about how the input manager works. Now, when I say a local reference, what I mean is it's on my hard drive. So if you're on a plane or you're somewhere that doesn't get Wi-Fi, you can still look up the documentation for Unity by clicking on that little book, and it has all the documentation. Like, you can go and search through documentation and it will find it on your local drive. On the other hand, if you do the trick where you go into like help and go to Unity API reference here in Visual Studio, this will load something that is online. So just be aware of those two differences. But if you use any of those little info books in Unity, it will open up the local version, and then you can just browse through or search through the local version. All right, so how do I actually get input? Scroll down. All right, yep. See also input. Okay, click on that. Hey, input. This could be done better. So here we go. Value equals input.getAxis horizontal. And so that's kind of like my tip-off of how this should work. So let's go into Visual Studio, and we'll just say, okay, we'll do float AX for the x-axis, for axis x equals input.getAxis horizontal. And I'm going to save that and now switch back to Unity. And now on up to, and I didn't do anything with it, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to print AX. I'm just going to print it out. Okay, so now I go back to Unity and I press play. And sometimes you need to click in the game pane for it to take input. Let's see if, doesn't look like that's the case now, but sometimes you have to do that. I'm going to turn off collapse so you can see that it's just generating stuff all the time here. And now if I hold left, you'll see it kind of eases to -1, and then I release it and it goes back to 0. If I hold right, it eases to 1, I release it, goes back to 0. If I hold left and then immediately press right, it jumps to 0 and then eases to 1. So that is all set by these values here. So gravity and sensitivity. Sorry. Actually, this is helpful. Gravity is the speed that the output value falls towards neutral when the device is at rest. That is the really most complex way I can think of saying, if it's at 1 and you let go of the key, how long does it take to get back to 0? And that number is 1 divided by whatever the gravity value is. So right now, if you release the key, it'll take 1/3 of a second to get back to 0. Same thing, sensitivity is the opposite. If I press a key, how long does it take to get to 1? It takes 1/3 of a second because there's 3 there. And then snap, again, that's another one where you're probably going to want to like mouse over it. Snap is basically if it's checked and you're at -1 and you press the right key, it'll jump to 0 and then go up. And you get different feels from different values on these controls. Okay, so now let's actually do something with it. So we want to move the ship. But what component do we need if we want to move something and actually have like physics and stuff on a thing that's moving? What do we need? Rigid body, that's exactly right. So I'm going to add a rigid body component. And there's a couple of different things that I could do here. One, I need to make sure that I turn off use gravity, because otherwise, as soon as I start playing, my ship's just going to fall, which doesn't really help anybody. So I'm going to turn off use gravity, and I'm going to go back to Visual Studio, and here I'm going to do another float, AY equals input dot get axis vertical. By the way, I tend to do a lot of like specific tabbing of things and all that. There are settings in here in preferences. I don't really have time to do this, but it's important to me. If you go down to behavior and you uncheck insert matching brace and uncheck enable on the fly code formatting, then like one thing that happens is you'll like, if you tab in like I do to try and get all the variable names or the field names to line up, and then you put the semicolon at the end, it'll delete all those tabs. That will stop that from happening. I find the code I write to be easier to read, and I also hate it when I do an open parentheses and it puts a close parentheses in. So I have turned this one and this one off, and it, for me, has made my life better. Though I will say, if your code looks like a total mess, you probably want to go under Edit, Format to Format Document before you submit code to Piazza, because it just makes it easier to read. If you tab things really carefully like I do, don't worry about it. But if your code is just all over the place with tabs, please do this. Yes? Do you mean key as an important? Okay. It is key for readability. In Python, it actually matters. Like the space tells it whether you're in an if clause or not. And so in Python, it is critical. In C#, the braces tell you that information. But if you want us to be able to read it and answer your question easily, spacing and tabbing is important. And the other thing that I say to people is, if you want, when you go back to the code a few days later to understand what you wrote, then spacing and tabbing is important. Yes?
I didn't know that first debug is very helpful.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
You can easily find your problems on what line they are, different things, you know, and you're not just like, okay, that's massive text.
Yep. Yeah, that's a very useful comment as well. Absolutely. So I'm just going to clean some of this up to make sure it all fits on one page. Okay, so I've got my AX and my AY, and now, you know, it's ironic. I just deleted start, and now I need it because I want to handle that to that rigid body. Now I could every frame say, okay, rigid body, rigid. Why can't I spell? Okay, equals get component rigid body, and then do things with it. And I can say, oh, okay, well, rigid dot velocity equals new vector3. And it turns out you don't have to pass 3 things into a vector3. This is cool. It's a little hard to see down here, so I'm going to zoom in. But if I go up and down, it'll show me the different ways that you can do a vector3 constructor. And it shows, oh, I only need to put in x and y. If z is 0, I don't need to put 0 in, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to do new vector 3, and I'm going to say ax comma ay. Boom, there you go. Okay, that's great, except this line where I get component rigid body, turns out get component slow. And if you do it every frame on a bunch of different objects, it can get bad. So it is helpful to do that only once and remember it. And this is one of the places that a field can really help us. So if I create a rigid body, rigid field up here, which if you make public, you can actually see it in the inspector, but you don't need to. And those of you who might have studied some computer science will be really upset with how many things I make public. I'm just doing prototyping, so it's totally okay. But I'm also going to create a public, I'm going to do that in a second, never mind. All right, so rigid body, rigid, there you go. And then in start, I'm actually going to say, well, I'm going to show you what not to do. So if I do this, see how it underlines it in yellow? Why is it underlining it in yellow? Does anybody know why it's underlining it in yellow? This is kind of a tough question, but I want you to all sort of think about it before we talked about the answer. So what am I doing up here when I say public rigid body rigid? What does that actually do? Somebody tell me what that does. Yes? Yeah, that's pretty close. That's really close. So what I'm doing is I'm declaring a variable of the type rigid body. So I'm saying there's a thing called rigid, and at some point I'm going to assign a rigid body to it. But right now it's currently null. It's got no value. Anytime you have the name of a type and then a name, you're declaring a variable. The reason this is upset, it says here, local variable rigid hides field rigid. So out here, this is a field which is part of this whole class playership. And so it means anything inside of playership can use it. This rigid is a local variable, which means it only exists within the start function. So because I've got a new thing named rigid, it's hiding the field rigid. So what I need to do is get rid of this. And that says, don't come up with a new thing that has the same exact name and confuse everybody. Use the one that's already there. And you can actually see that it's got them both highlighted, which is actually cool. This is a feature in Visual Studio that is not in MonoDevelop. You can see how every instance of rigid is highlighted in my code. And that helps me know that these three all refer to the same thing. So now here, I get the component rigid body, I put it into that container, that field rigid that we declared, and then later I can use it down here to set its velocity, and I don't have to be every single frame getting the component anew. So I get it once, and I do that time-consuming task once, and then I just use the variable over and over and over again. So now I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go back and hit play. And so I got my 0 thing over here, and it's playing. Now check this out. Oh yeah, it's the best game ever. It's not the best game ever. So it's really slow, right? So we need to multiply that, but you can see it is moving. So we need to multiply that by something. Now one of the really cool things about vectors is you can multiply a vector by a scalar, which means you can take a vector like this vector 3 ax, ay, and multiply it by a regular floating point number. Like, say, if for instance we were to say public float speed. And let's just set a default value of speed to 10. And if I want to, I can put the f after it. It's good practice to put the f there to tell it it's a float type. If it's an integer number, which means there's no decimal part, you don't need the f. But if you do put a decimal in there, you need the f there. So now I can just say, oh, this times speed. And what this does is it multiplies ax by 10 and ay by 10. And now let's see how this feels. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back to Unity. And it thinks for a second, and then, oh, hey, that feels a little better. All right, cool. That's nice. And this is actually how the controls will work in the project called Space Shmup. And then in that one, it actually has this cool kind of banking to it, which really makes it feel nicer. I'm concerned about time right now, so I'm not going to add that. But that could be a really cool thing that you might want to do to this project, is skip ahead in the book to the Space Shmup chapter and find the part where it talks about making the ship bank while you're moving it. And you can see the code there for doing that and then apply that to this one. That would be a really good thing for you to do as an enhancement to this. Cool. All right. So now I've got it moving around, and that is really, really good for that. Let's see. I think the next thing I should probably do is shoot at the mouse, because that's another big input thing that we're going to do for a lot of different games. So I got my mouse here, and we saw how mouse input works from Apple Picker. We're going to do something very, very similar here. So what I'm going to do is, in my update, I'm going to check to see. I'm going to check some mouse input here, and I'm going to say if input.mouse, let's say get mouse button, and it's hard for you all to see this, but get mouse button down. So the difference between these three, did I talk about this in Apple Picker, or do we need to? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so get mouse button down is true only on the frame where you push the mouse button down. Get mouse button up is true only on the frame when you release the mouse button. And get mouse button is just true every frame it's held down, and false every frame it's not held down. So most things that you interact with are actually on get mouse button up. Everything on the internet is on get mouse button up. Can you tell me why that might be? Why you want get mouse button up instead of get mouse button down? Yes? It's kind of similar to that. Anybody else got an idea on this? Yeah. That's what I'm saying. So why did they do that? What's the design choice behind that? Why is that a better experience for people?
So if you're trying to highlight a link, for example, and paste it somewhere, if you did get the mouse button down and you try and highlight it, it would then
Right, right. Is that what you were saying? Sort of. Okay, yeah. So like if you click on the link and drag across to try and highlight it, when it was on get mouse button down, as soon as you click, it would take you to another page. Another thing is allowing you to change your mind. Like I start clicking yes on do you want to answer this survey, and then I'm like, no, God, why would I want to answer a survey? So I move the mouse off and release. And because I don't release on the button, then it doesn't actually activate and take me to the survey that I didn't want to answer, right? So that's why get mouse button up is usually useful for that. For this game, because we want it to be every time you press down, it fires, then we're going to do get mouse button down. So if input.get mouse button down, and you can see here, returns true during the frame the user pressed the given mouse button. And it takes an integer as input. What would the integer be? That's kind of weird. Okay. So what I can do if I'm like, what would this integer be, is I just click on this, and I go under Help to Unity API reference, and it looks up that method and talks about what it is. So if we look through this, you can see that it says, oh, button values are 0 for left button, 1 for right button, and 2 for the middle button. Okay, so that means 0 is the left click, 1 is the right click, and 2 is the middle click. I don't know why they say click instead of button, but that's okay. There's also something else really important here. You need to call this from the update function, since state gets reset every frame. All the time, I'll see students that look for input.getButtonDown, which would be a keyboard button, or get mouse button down in fixed update, and it is irregular, and it doesn't happen all the time. And that's because if there are 4 updates between each fixed update, which would happen if you were running at 200 frames per second, which is not unheard of, that's pretty common, then if on this one, you actually click the button. This is the only one that get mouse button down is true. Then it's false and false before the fixed update gets called. So it's just luck that when you happen to press the button, a fixed update happens before the next update. So you have to have any kind of get mouse button down or get mouse button up in an update, not a fixed update. Fixed update does work very well for just get mouse button, which is true or false, because that's just true the whole time that the mouse button is held down. Again, some of this stuff is going to make sense more later, and that's one of the reasons we video it, is so you can go back and watch it and understand it better. All right, cool. So I get mouse button down, 0, because it's going to be the left mouse button, which is also your main button on your trackpad. So if input this, then I'm going to fire. And wouldn't it be sweet if that's all I had to do and it just magically fired? But no, fire is underlined in red, and then I highlight it, and it's like I have no idea what you're talking about. The name fire does not exist in the current context. So I need to write another function called fire, void fire. And this is where I'm going to put all my code to actually shoot. And there are a few things that we need to... Where'd my pens go? Oh, you're trying to donate them. All right. Yes? That is a great question. Yeah. So public void fire would make it public, which means that anybody could call it. So it would allow like an asteroid to tell the ship to fire. By removing the public, it makes it protected. So only the ship can fire itself. So only the player's ship can call fire, which just protects it a little bit. It means that like random objects can't tell it to do things. Right. So we need, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't have walked away from this board. The ship's here. The mouse pointer is here. And we need to fire towards the mouse pointer. So I'm here at this location, the mouse pointer's there. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, this is 0, 0, and this is like 10, 4 is the position of the mouse pointer in world coordinates. So how do I know what direction to go towards the mouse? Well, there's this mnemonic that is frankly a pretty terrible mnemonic, but I've always remembered it, which is A minus B looks at A. So if the mouse is point A and the ship is point B, if I say A minus B, that'll work out to the vector 10, 4 minus 0, 0, which is, of course, 10, 4, and then that's a vector in the direction of A. So if A were over here, anywhere A is, if I take A's position and subtract B's position, I get something in the direction of A. And we're going to use that as the direction for our bullet to fire. So there are several things I'm going to have to add here. One is I'm going to need something as a prefab for the bullet, just like the prefab for the apple that you did. So I'm going to say public game object, bullet prefab. And that I'm just going to have to define in Unity. So I declare it here, giving it a container for that value, and then I'm going to define it in Unity. Then down here, I'm going to say game object, go, or I'll just, yeah, go's fine, equals instantiate game object bullet prefab. So there's a couple of things here. Again, you saw this in the apple picker. I've got a prefab. I'm instantiating it, and I'm telling it you're instantiating it as a game object. This means that, so instantiate can be used for all sorts of different things. This is saying the thing I want back is a game object. If you can't give me a game object from this, let me know, because it's a problem. That's what's going on. And it gives that back to me as a game object. Then I can do some cool things. I can say, oh, well, go.transform.position equals transform.position, which is saying set the position of this new game object, the bullet, to the position of this object, which is the ship. So now I've got that set up, and I want to give this bullet some velocity. So I just need to remember to add a rigid body to the bullet. So I'm going to say rigid body rigid bull for the rigid bullet, I guess, equals go.getComponent rigid body. This is another place that you see this, and what this bracket, these angle brackets kind of access, it's called a generic, which means getComponent can give you all sorts of things back, and this is telling you what kind you want. So you could do getComponent mesh filter, you do getComponent camera, all these kinds of things. We want a rigid body. So I got the rigid body, and I can say, okay, rigid bullet, come on, rigid bullet dot velocity equals, and here's where we're going to have to use this direction to the mouse thing. So I'm actually going to have to comment this out and get to the mouse. Get direction to the mouse. All right. So if you remember, we did this in Apple Picker as well. So I'm going to say vector3 impos equals input dot mouse position. Right? But that gives me the mouse position on the screen. It's in pixels with 0, 0 being the top left. So I got to convert that into world coordinates. So I'm going to say, okay, well, vector3 impos world equals, or let's just do impos 3D because it's in three-dimensional coordinates, equals camera dot main dot screen to world point, and that takes as input a world position, which is awesome. Except right now the impos.z is 0. Does anybody remember what problem that causes from the Apple Picker stuff? Anybody got any ideas on that? Yeah. You were going to guess what? Well, it's actually, it ends up actually giving you something where it does occupy the same space. So if this is the camera, and this is the center of the camera, and it's got this view frustum because it's a perspective camera right now. And I just do the screen to world point with a z of 0, it's actually going to give me the location of the camera. Because what happens is this goes out into space, and at some point intersects the screen, which I'm trying to draw in 3D, but I'm a bad artist, right? So here's the mouse pointer on the screen. But how does it know where the screen is relative to the 3D world? Really, the mouse pointer is just a vector that passes through the mouse pointer out in space. It's a ray. And we have to tell it how far out into space to project that mouse pointer. So we need to set a z value that will be the distance to this plane here that we want the mouse pointer to kind of be projected onto. And that's what the z position does. And what I usually do to make sure that it's projected onto the plane of z equals 0 is I go back and I look at Unity and I say, okay, so the ship, the player ship, is at z equals 0. The camera is at z equals -10. So then, if I project it 10 units out into the world, then it will be lined up with that z equals 0 plane. And it will be in the same plane as the ship. If I don't do that, then the ship will not be firing out in the XY plane. It'll be firing forward or backward or some other crazy thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I need to set impos.z equal to the negative of camera.main.transform.position.z. So again, there's only one camera, and in fact it's tagged as the main camera. If you click on the camera, you can see here it's tagged as the main camera. The name doesn't matter, but the tag does. So camera.main finds the main camera, we get its transform, we get its position, and from that we get z, which is -10. And the negative of -10 is +10, which tells us when we convert the screen into world point, we go out 10 meters into the world, and that's where we place our position. So now that I've got impos 3D, I can get vector 3 dir to mouse equals impos 3D minus transform dot position. And again, we've got A minus B looks at A, looks to impos 3D. Now, if the mouse is really, really far away, dir to mouse is going to be a long vector. And if it's really, really close, it's going to be a short vector. So one of the things that we're going to do is normalize it, which sets it to a length of 1. So I'm just going to say, okay, dir to mouse dot normalize. And this takes it, no matter how long it is, and shortens it to exactly 1. And the nice thing about 1 is anything you multiply by 1 is still the original number. So if I want my bullet to fly at 20 meters per second, then I just multiply 20 by the dir to mouse, and it will move like 20 times that direction of 1. That wasn't very clear, I'm afraid. Did that make sense? That was the best reaction I've ever gotten. I'm like, does that make sense? She's like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, okay. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is I've got this long vector, I shorten it to where it's 1 in length. And it doesn't matter which way it's rotated, it's 1 in length. And 1 times 20 is 20. So that means I'll get something moving 20 per second in whatever direction it goes. That was probably, I hope, more clear. Yeah? Okay, good. Awesome. Great. So I normalize it, and then I just say, okay, well, rigid bullet dot velocity equals dir to mouse times bullet speed. And I haven't made bullet speed yet, so it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But I can go up here, and I can say, oh, public float bullet speed equals 20. Now, whenever I click, it should create a bullet inside my ship that shoots out in that direction. Except what's going to happen based on your experience of instantiating objects inside other objects? It's going to collide. That's exactly right. It's going to collide, and it's going to go shooting off in some random direction. So we need to do some physics layering. So I'm going to go to Unity. I'm going to create a 3D object that is a sphere. I'm going to make it small. I'm going to make it like 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. That's still, that's nice and visible on my screen there. I'm going to call this bullet. And I'm going to add component. Remember, I had to remember to add a rigid body. Add a rigid body, turn off use gravity, and then I'm going to do some layering here. I'm going to go into my layers and add some layers. I'm just going to be like, all right, so player ship, and bullet, and asteroid. And, you know, we might add some more later, but that's good for now. Save this, go to bullet, put that in the bullet layer. Done. Go to player ship, put that in the player ship layer, and it's going to ask me, do you want the cockpit to also be in the player ship layer? And I'm like, yes, all the children. And so then I drag bullet over to the side to make it a prefab, and I delete the original. And can anyone think of the one last thing I need to do before I'm able to fire bullets? Yes? Oh, that's so close. That's not exactly right. Yeah? No. It's on this screen over here. That's exactly right. Drag the bullet prefab over. Awesome. So I take the bullet prefab and I put it into the bullet prefab container, you know, the field here. And now when I hit save and hit play, if I click, oh, okay, so there's two things going on. What's the first thing going on with physics layers? What did I forget to do? That's exactly right. I set it all up, and I forgot to go set the physics layers. What else is going on here? So it's not the camera. It's actually the object. The camera is still. The object's spinning around. But because I'm controlling the velocity with x and y, with the x and y axes, right? I'm setting the velocity to 0, but I'm not doing anything with the rotation. So when that ball comes out, it starts it spinning around. And you'll see that like the more I fire, like it'll get all spun up, maybe. So that you need to fix by adding constraints. Watch, as soon as I add freeze rotation, it'll stop rotating. And the other thing that we want to do is probably freeze position in Z, which is not a problem in this particular game, but a lot of times if you're doing a 2D game and you run into something, your ship will just go off into the distance or go towards the camera, and that's not what you want. So also, notice I made those changes, but they went away. They went away because I made those changes while it was running. And anything you change while Unity is running, with some very small exceptions, will undo as soon as you stop running. So now I have to remember to do that again, freeze the Z position, freeze the X, Y, and Z rotation, and now the ship's not going to rotate. We'll still have the problem with the bullets, like pushing the ship a little bit, but we're not going to have a problem with the ship rotating. Now let's get rid of that collision thing. So edit, project settings, physics, and I'm going to go here, all right, bullet, 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 player ship. Bullets don't hit the player ship. And that's it. Like now I save this and I hit play, and now the ship moves around, and no matter where the ship is, it'll shoot at the mouse. Now we're also not destroying the bullets ever, so you can see that they go on forever. That's fine. That's fine for now. That's something that we'll fix later. All right, so we have like 4 minutes left in class today. I would like to ask if there's any questions about what I've done here, and then tomorrow I will post like the second half of this tutorial that actually adds the asteroids. Like I have actually done a thing where I built asteroids in like 45 minutes before, but I wanted to make sure that we took it kind of step by step here. So any questions about this that we've done so far on this project? Yes? Yes. Because I am lazy. That's the answer. The question was, why did I use bull speed instead of bullet speed? It's because I'm lazy. But let's say I'm like, man, I should be a better person. Turns out I can right-click on this and refactor, rename, and I don't know where it went. Why didn't it? Refactor, rename. Did it? Oh, it did. Okay. Sorry. In other things, it doesn't. It pops up a thing. All right. So you right-click and you refactor, rename, and it turns out it has now renamed it down here as well. So if you're lazy like me and then you decide you want to be a better person, you can go change it to bullet speed. Now, one thing to be aware of though is like, let's say I refactor this and I change it to ship speed to make it more clear. If I go back now to, and let's say I set it to 5 here, I guess. What I'm trying to show, because I didn't change either of those, but the idea is because it's now got a different name, it's probably serialized differently. So anything you set here to that old name would not carry over in Unity. So if I changed the bullet speed to 40 here and then renamed it from bull speed to bullet speed, it would go back to the default value in the script. So that's just something to be aware of. And once it does that, like I'm like, oh, I can change this back to 10. I hit save, and I go back to Unity, and it's still 5 in Unity because Unity overrides what's in the script, like we talked about before. Awesome. Any other questions on this? Did it make sense pretty well? Okay, good, good. Yeah, you had a question?
Oh, this is going to be due Monday, correct?
This is going to be due Monday. This plus the stuff that I add tomorrow is going to be due Monday. You know, so make sure you got some time for it. But the idea is we're going to give you something Wednesday that you're going to work on and turn in on Monday, including a couple small things like the green apple, gold apple thing, if you can get them done. Then on Monday, we will show you how to do the green apple, gold apple thing and say do that plus an enhancement of your own design by Wednesday. So you've got 2 days to add the thing that we show you how to do on Monday, and then add something of your own, like the banking thing that I said might be a cool thing. Yes? It does not have to be code related. It is generally better if it's code related, but if you wanted to like model a really cool looking ship, that's great. Just like make sure that you tell us that you modeled it and that you didn't just grab it online somewhere. And just know that like, probably, I don't know, an hour of modeling is going to be worth about 15 minutes of coding in terms of the enhancement. Just we look at it and we're like, this is a coding class, so if you're doing something creative with code, that's even better. And for God's sake, like, I got a bunch of people last time who tried like 3 projects in a row to be like, I added a start menu, and like that doesn't count. Like, like trying to do something different each thing.
It counts once.
It counts once. It counts the first time. But after you've added a start menu to a project once, we're like, didn't this person add a start menu last time? So yeah.
Significantly less impressive the more often you do this.
The exact same thing. Yes. Yeah. So cool. Is that it? Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Stick to it. I know it doesn't make a ton of sense now. It will make sense, I promise.
It's doing a weird thing.
Okay, let me stop my OBS first.